Welcome to this edition of the Yahowah blog. As you can see, real men love strawberry milk. Wookie finds it absolutely delicious. We ran out of tea in the small refrigerator, so we're substituting. And my friend is a big fan. I am Yada. This is another episode of Appalling Twistianity. And here in the Rainbow Studio, we were considering what Yahweh had to say about those who respect and revere his testimony, his covenant, his Towrah, and consider that in contrast to Paul's annulment of it and his disparagement of the Towrah, calling the Towrah pornography in his opening statement in the first chapter of Galatians. So this continues to read as we conclude our recitation of the 25th Mizmowr. A very close and intimate fellowship with Yahweh is certain for those who respect and revere him. And his family-oriented covenant relationship he makes known to him through Yada. Now, speaking of Tob, good, there is another insight from the man Yahweh said was Sadak right, and that would be Dowd. It reads, "And then I encourage you to consider acting upon and engaging in that which is good, beneficial, moral, agreeable, generous, and pleasing. As a result, and live forever." This is Mizmowr Psalm 37:27. In other words, God's view of his Towrah guidance is the antithesis of Paul's. I wonder who's right when God and Paul disagree, as they do on everything. Who do you suppose is right?
I put my money on Yahweh.
I'll put my money on Yahweh. I'd put my soul on Yahweh. A bit more comprehensive illustration regarding the enduring merits of Yahweh's Towrah is advanced in the 40th Mizmowr Psalm. And once again, these lyrics were scribed by a man whose name means beloved. He was the Messiah. He was the Son of God. He was our Savior. This is Dowd. If you want God to view you similarly, this would be very good advice. At that time, I shared, beloved, I am coming with the scroll of the written document, which was dedicated and dictated, scribed on my behalf regarding the work that you have done and will do to accept me, God. I genuinely want and willingly accept this. That's Psalm 48. He's going to designate that scroll as the Towrah in his next breath. But think of that. So at that time I shared, behold, I am coming with the scroll of the written document, which is dictated and scribed on my behalf regarding the work that you have done and will do to accept me. I genuinely want and willingly accept this. He's speaking of the Towrah. This is the Messiah. This is the Son of God. This is our Savior. This is the former and returning King. This is the chosen one. And he said he is coming with the written document that was scribed on his behalf, that explains the work that Yahweh has done and will do to accept him, not reject him, not condemn him, not punish him, accept him. And he genuinely wants and is willing to accept this. Your Towrah, your instruction and teaching, your guidance and direction is within the midst of my inner nature. I have proclaimed the good news of vindication as a result of being right, fairly and accurately, responsively, honestly, and correctly in the great assembly and esteemed community. Behold, my lips have not restrained Yahweh. 49. Well, the man that God called right, the man that God said he personally anointed as his Messiah, the only person that God said, he is my son, I am his father, says that he's arriving before Yahowah, which would be in Shamaim heaven, carrying the Towrah, which was inscribed so that he would be accepted. Well, this absolutely, unequivocally annuls Christianity. It rips Paul's ridiculous thesis apart and tosses it in the trash. You can kiss your New Testament goodbye. Throw it away. Burn it up. Get rid of it. If you want to encounter God, if you want to enter heaven, if you want to benefit from the Messiah and the Son of God, you'd better grasp hold of his Towrah and read his instructions and teaching, his guidance and direction, and then make it part of your inner nature, just as did Dowd. It's the Towrah, which is the good news. It is the good news of vindication, not Paul's, but I, Paul, say, not the gospel of grace. This in itself, just one statement, is more than sufficient to completely obliterate every ounce of credibility claimed by the Christian religion. It's lethal for Judaism too, because it elevates Dowd to a very special status and uses Yahweh's name. You yourself know, you respect and acknowledge, you, Yada, that I have not hidden or concealed your means to achieve righteous vindication by being correct in the nature of my thinking. You want to meet God, as Dowd has done? You think your way to him. And the key thing is not what you believe, it's being right. If you are not correct, you are not vindicated. And what is the first step you must take in being right? You must Yada. You must come to know. I have spoken about your trustworthiness and your reliable nature, your amunah, and your salvation and your deliverance, Yeshua. So much for the Towrah can't save. Isn't that the mantra of pathetic Paul, which is why he created his new religion and his mythical Jesus, his man God who's so anemic men can kill him? Oh, Dowd says, I have spoken about your trustworthiness. He's speaking to Yahowah and your reliable nature and your salvation and deliverance, Yahowah. I have not hidden or concealed your mercy or your integrity, your honest and steadfast reliability on behalf of the esteemed community in the great assembly. Psalm 40:11. Yahowah, you will not withhold your love or your favoritism, your affection, mercy from me, your unfailing devotion, love, and favoritism. Moreover, your integrity, honesty, and trustworthiness continually protect me from harm, and they spare my life. For indeed, you are surrounding me, providing a covering for me, God. Mizmowr 42:12. The very fact that Yahowah is trustworthy and reliable means that the Talmud and New Testament and Quran are absolute trash. They contradict him in every possible way. A God whose testimony has to be contradicted, ignored, replaced, changed, upended is not one who has any integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, and is capricious. He is the opposite of everything that anyone who has ever come to know Yahowah has to say about him. Therefore, the God of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms is not the God of the New Testament, Talmud, or Quran. They are capricious deities that change everything. You cannot trust a God by any name who changes what he has previously stated and reneges on his earlier promises. But that is the heart and soul, the darkness that lurks within Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. For the entire duration of time, evil and wrongdoing will not be counted against me, and I will not witness them, though they are more numerous than I have hairs on my head. Why did he say that? To tell you that he wasn't going bald? I don't think so. What he is doing is completely repudiating Pauline Christianity, which is the only form of the religion. Paul created the religion. He created Jesus Christ. The first 14 books in the Christian New Testament were written by Paul, who even admitted that he was demon-possessed, who included all manner of rational fallacies in his letters, copious contradictions even of himself, never a single accurate citation from Yahweh, not even a mention of Yahweh's name. He didn't even quote one thing from his mythical Jesus. And he claimed that if you have a single failing within the Torah, you miss one of its rules, you're dead, that the Torah condemns you based upon getting one thing wrong, and every Christian that's ever read the New Testament knows it. It's irrefutable. That's what Paul claimed. Dowd just said the opposite. You carry around the Psalms as if they were inspired by God, and they were. And they just annulled the number one theme of your New Testament, that the Torah condemns, and if you're guilty of a single violation of it, you're guilty of the entire thing, and there is no remedy for you. That's the basis of Christianity. And this says that Dowd, which is a correct assessment, made more mistakes than he had hairs on his head, and yet there wasn't a single one of them that would be counted against him, not for the entire duration of time. And if you are a practicing Jew or you are a Christian, you don't have a clue that this statement annuls your religion, nor do you have any idea as to how Dowd was in a position to make this claim. What caused his numerous mistakes, wrongdoing, to be absolved and not seen, never counted against him through all of time?
He's Zadok.
Well, he's Zadok. That's not the answer. But he is Zadok.
Shocker that I'd miss that.
Yeah, shocker. It's because he carried everything he ever did wrong, would do wrong, has done wrong, and every member of the covenant family has done wrong, could do wrong, would do wrong, into Sheol, and he deposited it there on Matsah. Therefore, when he carried our guilt, our wrongdoing, and he placed it all in Sheol, which is the equivalent of a black hole where nothing escapes throughout all of time, and it's all there, guess what? There isn't a single mistake, not a single act of wrongdoing that can be held against us, because they're all gone. It's the most ingenious way to enable us to appear not guilty before God. We are innocent, acquitted. Why? Because our guilt's all carried away. That's exactly what Dowd did. He knew from the Torah that the purpose of unyeasted bread was to remove this fungus of yeast such that it would never be associated with our souls again. And he realized that he himself would fulfill Matzah, being the soul that carried it all away, his and ours. That's the answer. Oh, guess what? The gospel Jesus doesn't do. He was napping during Matzah. Yep, just napping because, well, he, even though there was no correlation to Passover, couldn't have been, of course, on his crucifixion, which annuls the only gateway, the only doorway to life. You want to live by a sacrificial death, it had better be the lamb on Passover, or it's worthless, according to God. And yet you want to estrange his crucifixion, which didn't actually occur because he's a myth. And then you want from Passover, and then you want him to be napping in the grave. Well, that crucifixion thing, it was hurtful. So he needed a nap before he could, get up and be resurrected, of course. So he was napping. No, Dowd was not napping. The actual Messiah carried our guilt and his into Sheol, depositing it there, never to be seen again. And guess what is never mentioned in the New Testament? Which means there can be no salvation in the New Testament. Oops. That's the answer. So, my heart and judgment are restored, accepting and delighted with Yahowah, saving me. Yahowah is prepared and ready, even excited about helping and supporting me, influencing and assisting me. Ezra. There are so many variations of Ezra that are written throughout the Torah and prophets and Psalms. And what it says is that when it's first used, that woman was created to Ezra, man, support, influence, assist, help. And throughout the Torah, we find that God is here to influence and assist, help and support us, just as Dowd wrote in this Mizmowr song. That's a father helping his children. The most interesting, I think, use of Ezra in the inspired works of Yahowah is in the 89th Mizmowr. It's something that within a week or so I'll reach in our library studio as we are returning to the 89th Mizmowr and considering how it was revealed, when it was revealed, why it was revealed, and what the result of it was. But there, we're told explicitly that God would deploy two individuals that he had come to know and accepted, tested, and shown to be reliable, and that he would deploy two of them in the most remarkable way. And their purpose would be to Ezra Dowd and to restore that relationship, because Dowd ultimately made a really, really big goof. And he and Yahowah were incommunicado for a while. And God came up with the most ingenious way of resolving that. And that's the message of the last mashal, the 31st proverb, as well as the 89th Psalm. And we will share that with you. But I want you to know that it's Yahowah who is the one, Ezra, who is supporting, assisting, and helping Dowd. Like Yahowah, I would rather listen to Dowd than Shaul, Paul. And nothing has changed in 3,000 years. So let's consider one last word of advice, some of which also appeared in a previous chapter that I shared on this program. This next morsel of guidance comes from the Torah itself. Moshe is summarizing what he has learned for our benefit. And the great liberator says, that which is undisclosed is for Yahowah, our God. Those things which are revealed and made known belong to us and are for our children eternally and forever, to act upon and to conduct our lives in accordance with all of the words of this Torah, this signed, written, and enduring way of treating people, giving us the means to explore, to seek, and to find, then choose the source from which instruction, teaching, guidance, and direction flow, that provides answers which facilitate our restoration and return, even our response and reply to that which is good, pleasing, beneficial, favorable, healing, and right, and that which causes us to be loved, to become acceptable, and to endure, purifying and cleansing us, so as to provide an opportunity to change our thinking, our attitude, and direction. That is a definition of Torah from all of its component parts and related words. This was written in Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:29. It also happens to be the very chapter that Moshe prophetically reveals the arrival of the Nakri, the observant foreigner, who will appear before the earth is rendered scorched, probably a nuclear holocaust, as a direct result of it descending into the conditions that were experienced in Sodom and Gomorrah. It says that the Nakri will arrive in the last days to liberate Israel from itself, to resolve the religiosity of God's people before it is too late. You're listening to the Nakar now. Indeed, truly and surely, you should listen to the voice and the call, the invitation and the summons of Yahweh your God, for the purpose of observing, closely examining, and carefully considering the terms and conditions of his binding covenant contract and his clearly communicated prescriptions regarding life, which are inscribed in the written scroll of this, the Towrah, the instruction and teaching, the guidance and direction. That is because you can actually be transformed after changing and be restored after returning to Yahweh, your God, with all of your heart and thinking, with all of your soul and consciousness. Dabarym 30:10. For these conditions of the agreement, which beneficially I am instructing you this day, they are not too difficult for you. They're not a hardship for you, nor are they beyond your reach. Dabarym 30:11. Indeed, the exceedingly powerful and great word of your God facilitates your approach and brings you near, enabling you to engage in a personal relationship. As part of your speech, as it exists in your heart, influencing your thinking, and to engage with, capitalize upon, and celebrate him. Open your eyes. Establish this perspective and become aware. I am offering on your behalf and in your presence this day an association with the life and living, and an association that which is beneficial and productive, but also that which is associated with the death and with that which is bad, evil, wicked, harmful, and destructive. Babylon 30:15. Because that which I am instructing and guiding you this day is for the purpose of you wanting to genuinely love and you choosing to actually demonstrate your affection in a personal and familiar relationship so as to be closely associated with Yahweh, your God, achieving this result by actually walking in his ways. It is also for the purpose of observing, closely examining, and carefully considering his terms and conditions as they pertain to his relationship agreement, his clearly communicated and engraved prescriptions of what you should do in life to be cut into that relationship, and his means to exercise good judgment and justly resolve disputes, as well as to restore your life and keep you alive, renewing and preserving your life, to make you great, increasing you exponentially, so that you grow in every possible way. In addition, Yahweh, your God, will kneel down, dismissing or diminishing, I should say, himself. Imagine that. Yahweh, your God, will kneel down, diminishing an aspect of himself in love to greet, welcome, and bless you, invoking loving favors upon you in the realm where relationally you are going and will be included within this named place of renown, receiving it as an inheritance. Dabarym never should have been called Deuteronomy 30:16. But if you turn in your heart and your thinking away from him, and if you do not listen and are lured away, and you bow down in worship to other gods, and you actively engage with and serve them, I am reporting the following message, a warning and verdict this day that indeed you will be utterly destroyed, completely annihilated, ceasing to exist, and not elongating your days upon the earth. I have testified repeatedly to restore and warn you in this day with regard to the spiritual realm and in association with the material world, and about life and about death. And I have freely offered, and on your behalf, in your presence, the blessing which restores the relationship, and also the curse of being abated and seen as worthless. So you should actually choose in favor of continued living, of life and renewal, of nourishment and growth, so that you and your offspring are restored, living, renewed, and spared lives. Dabarym should not have been called Deuteronomy 30:19. This is acknowledged by choosing to genuinely love, by closely associating with Yahowah, your God, by listening to his voice and his call, and by choosing to stay especially close to him. For indeed, he is the source of your life and of renewal and of lengthening your days, enabling you to dwell in the realm which Yahowah has promised to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yishak, and to Jacob, to give it as a gift to them. The Dabarym words should never have been called Deuteronomy 30:20. Yahweh's perspective, his Towrah guidance, is sufficiently clear to guide those who are seeking to know him, those who want to understand what he is offering and what he is asking in return. There is no correlation of any kind between Yahowah and anything that anyone will ever read in Shaul's, Paul's pitiful epistles. These things are life and death. As we open a new chapter and proceed, we are in a better position to ascertain the differences between Paulos's gratia-based euangelion, good messenger and beneficial message, which has been corrupted to gospel, and the alternative, that of Yahowah endowed, the Towrah and its covenant. And in this light, the so-called Christian New Testament is in irresolvable conflict. It constantly contradicts and replaces everything in God's word, and therefore it is a lie. Since the Torah is the ultimate in godly documents, we're not at liberty to change it, at least without consequence. And as a result, by thinking to replace it or trash it, as Paul does, the likes of Paul, Peter, Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John obfuscate Yahweh's proven testimony, his prophetic testimony, his inspired testimony. And so let's be clear. An euangelion gospel can never supersede the Torah, much less stand alongside of it. If you're carrying around a Bible and it has the first 5 books of the Torah, Bereshith, Shemot, Kara, Bamidbar, and Dabarym in it, along with a New Testament, you have nothing but a contradiction. And a book named after Babylon, Babel and Bible, are written with the exact same letters. Babel means to confuse, to confound, by intermixing truth and lies, by putting a New Testament adjacent to what's called an Old Testament when they contradict one another. Having introduced his second thought with, I marvel and I am astonished, even surprised that in this way quickly you change, departing and becoming disloyal apostates, traitors away from your calling in the name of cherish, the graces, the cute little girls, to a different good message and beneficial messenger. That was Galatians 1:6, which we tore to ribbons in a previous program. Paul continued by contradicting himself.
Shocker.
Shocker. Which does not exist differently. Excuse me? He just said, you were traitors to him, Galatians. So those who were the first to hear Paul preach rebuked him. They completely disagreed with everything they said. He said they opposed him. So the first to listen to Paul rejected him. Those he spoke directly to. So why are his ridiculous words in a religious document that is ascribed to God when those who heard him knew he was making a fool of himself by his own admission? And then he says, you were lured away by a different gospel, a different euangelion, which is not really different. Huh? It's either different or it's the same, which does not exist different. If not, perhaps some are the ones stirring you up, confusing you, and also wanting and proposing to change and pervert the beneficial messenger and the healing message of the Christu. Christu was invented by Paul in the opening statement of this letter. Prior to that time, there was no iusu, iusu, iusun. There was no Christu, Christo, or Christum. The first appearance of that name and title was in Paul's letter to the Galatians, written in 52 CE. So one could not have rejected the gospel of Christu because it did not exist. The first gospels would not be written for over 2 decades from this point. There was no gospel of Mark, of Matthew, of Luke, or John. The first of them would be scribed by Paul's pals, Mark and Luke. And that was in 75 CE in Rome by 2 idiots who were burnishing Paul's resume and who were not eyewitnesses to anything. They weren't even in the country at the time. And the next 2, Matthew and John, were written by imposters. Some 3 generations thereafter, in places we don't even know, and between 95 and 100 CE. I mean, you got nothing. There are no gospels at this time. And so there could not have been a euangelion of Christ. There wasn't even a Christ prior to his first sentence. We're in Galatians 1:7. Christ was invented in 1:2 or 1:3 in that first run-on sentence. So he's lying his teeth off, lying through his tuchus. And here he's saying that there are those that would pervert the message and the gospel of the person who never existed, all to rebel and become traitorous towards Paul. So how can Paul say that you were a traitor to me because you rejected my euangelion, my gospel, and you accepted the gospel of another, which was different, but that it wasn't different, and yet there was one stirring you up and confusing you by wanting and proposing that you change and that You pervert the gospel, so how was it not different? I mean, this man is an absolute numbskull. There is nothing about him that can be associated with God or anything good. And guess what God doesn't have? A euangelion. God does not have, has never had, will never have a euangelion, which is the compound word that is rendered as gospel, which God doesn't have one of those either. Why don't you read the Torah, prophets, and Psalms and you find a gospel for me, huh? I'll give you $1 billion. You find a gospel in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. You and Greek means either good or beneficial or healing, any one of those three things. And angelion is a transliteration of the Greek word that has been rendered in English by just replicating the sound of it as angel. Angelion. Yahowah has malak. Malak are typically spiritual messengers, although a malak can be a man. And what happened in the New Testament is that rather than conveying malak as a title of these spiritual messengers that Yahowah deploys, they changed messenger in Hebrew to messenger in Greek, which is angelion, message or messenger. And rather than translating that, because that was used as a translation, instead it was transliterated, so the word became a title, and the title then became angels. And so this is the good message of the angels, spoken by the devil. I mean, there is no such thing. So he is having a tizzy fit about people choosing a message that is different than his, but that is not different than his, that perverts his, that has absolutely nothing to do with God. God has a Torah. God has prophets. God has testimony. God has words. Yahowah has a covenant. Yahowah has moed, which are invitations to be called out and meet. God has many aspects to his message, but in all of that, the things that are important are Torah, teaching and guidance, moedim, which would be the restoring witnesses to the everlasting testimony. Those are the 7 annual meetings with Yahowah, also called Mikre. And he has a bareth, a covenant. He has chosen people, that would be Yisraelites and Yehudim. He doesn't have a gospel. He doesn't have a Bible. He doesn't have scripture. He doesn't have a gospel. So Paul is the one with the gospel. And by the way, there was no Christ. There is no mention of a Christ anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. I'll let you play that game for $1 billion too. Find me a Christ in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. There's the Messiah. But if you look at the anointed Messiah, the one that Yahowah anointed, it's Dowd. Jesus is never mentioned. You've been played for a fool if you're Christians, and you're idiots, Jews, for not being able to impugn the credibility of this religion. It never should have gotten started. But you're at fault there too, because you trained Paul to act like a rabbi and to twist God's testimony to argue against him. That's what you did while erasing his name. Paul was a good rabbi. Now, this same clause was translated in the Nestle Allen 27 edition with McReynolds in English interlinear as, "What not is other except, not applicable. Some are the ones troubling you and wanting to turn across the good message of the Christ." I don't have a magic interpreting ring, so I'm not going to attempt that. Since the writing quality is so poor, I would call that a word salad, since Paul infrequently defines his terms, since it required the deployment of evidence and reason to ascertain the distinction between Paul's position and God's, and he has clearly contradicted and misrepresented God's, disparaging God's, calling God's pornography. I suspect that the Galatians were scratching their heads, wondering what Paul was trying to say. Half a breath ago, he bemoaned that there were two distinctly different approaches. He was angry because so many had abandoned his mantra for the other proposition. Now he appears to be saying that these two messages are not different at all. But why the fuss if they're not different? Other than Paul is the author of one and somebody else is the author of the other, and Paul got his little feelings hurt because he wanted to be the grand poobah. Huh? But they are only being made to appear in discord by some unknown agitators. But how can that be when in his previous sentence, he had his Lord snatching us away from the old system? So his system can't be associated with God because, well, just in the previous statement, his Lord ripped us away from that old system. The one that Dowd, who was the actual Messiah and Son of God, acclaimed was responsible for saving him, mind you. Now, in spite of this, the toxic maestro of confusion is calling his rivals terrasso confusing. The man responsible for the greatest upheaval in human history said that those who had challenged his upending of God's message and replacement of his son, Dowd, and his people, the Israelites, was guilty of promoting a perversion. I mean, the hypocrisy is so thick, you couldn't stir it with a spoon. Well, typically less insane, this is the tactic politicians deploy when demeaning their rivals, projecting their faults upon their opponents. When the party who is not actually guilty of the crime responds to the arbitrary attack, the audience becomes sufficiently confused to question those inappropriately slandered, leaving the actual perpetrator of the crime unscathed. Donald Trump is an expert at this, and their biggest fault no longer is even pondered or considered because it's been projected on their foes. That is what is occurring here. Paul could not have been more disingenuous if he tried. So in these words, we're also witnessing the insecurity of this man, the very trait which made him susceptible to Satan. Paul has thin skin, just like Trump today. I said they had a lot in common. He cannot tolerate a rival. Like Trump today, I said they had a lot in common. He pounces on every opponent. That would be like Trump today. I said that they were the same, didn't I? Matter of fact, they're the same because they're both possessed by the same demon. Every threat to his authority, real or imagined, must be lashed out against viciously and condemned, just like Trump. The liar calls others perceived as more worthy liars and attempt to cut them down so that he can rise above them. Everyone is scum. Trump's most recent, I'm writing Supreme Court in lowercase because I don't respect them anymore.
Yeah, they become a joke.
Because they voted against him. It's so revolting. The very fact that there are MAGAs tells you just how stupid you have to be a Christian, since almost all MAGAs are Christians. And like the most insecure of men, Paul is drawn to those who are confident, in this case to Dowd and Moshe, in hopes of filling the enormous void in his own life, but he will also turn against them as a result of his own flawed and corrupt character. It is the dance which has been performed thousands of times and in every walk of life. but never with the stakes this high or this reprehensibly. If you have never witnessed the destructive capacity of an insecure individual, you're fortunate. And if, as a result, you have not seen this character flaw that's driving Paul's inappropriate and angry rants against the Galatians for not believing him, when at the very least, I hope that you see his words are as mean-spirited and disingenuous as the Donald Dumpster today. This is a million miles from the Towrah. When his introductory statement is set into context of Paul's life and his writings as we know them, it becomes obvious that Paul's message was the only one which was completely different from everyone else's, including Yahowah's and Dowd's, the prophets, and the Towrah. And considering the qualifications of the others, Shaul's contrarian diatribe is hard to believe. The purpose of this epistle was to launch a counterattack, a defense of Paul's imagined authority through a series of counteroffenses. Consistent with the preview presented in the opening chapter that I shared with you many programs ago, Paul will continue to undermine, to belittle, and besmirch the Towrah, separating himself and his religious followers from Father and Son, doing so to nullify their sacrifice and to replace it with one that never occurred. Now, you may be wondering why I am now so judgmental, tearing Paul to shreds for mistakes, both big and small, especially since I admitted to being fooled by him a score of years ago. And the reasons are varied. As I have shared initially, my intent in writing this, and it was originally written as questioning Paul. And then it has now become Twistianity. In fact, I even wrote the first draft of this and published it under the Great Galatians debate. I don't know, almost 20 years ago now. So it was the Great Galatians debate. A friend of mine in New Zealand had read my books and sent me a note and said, that down here we have all manner of pastors on the radio and television that are telling us outrightly that Paul annulled the Towrah, that he nailed it to the cross, that he did away with it, and that he did so in Galatians. And they said, how can that be? That's what he wrote. And I said, I'll go find the answer to that. And so I began this process with what I call the Great Galatians debate. And then over time, that one volume became several volumes under questioning Paul, which is what Shaul means, to question him. And more recently, I've expanded that to 5 volumes. I could probably write 25 volumes on this. It's just that it would bore the living tar out of me after a while because it's just so stupid. I mean, how much stupid can a person wallow in before they just... That's
evidently 2.5 billion can do that.
Well, they can, but they don't know that's stupid, and that's my job, is to point out that it's stupid. But since I know that it's stupid, the last thing I want to have to do is expand it. But anyway, it's now 5 volumes. They average about 700 pages apiece. And the entire process, all I do is I compare what Paul said to what God said, or Paul said to what else Paul said, and take Paul to task based upon what Paul said. Therefore, it's the most effective way to denounce the Christian religion, the New Testament, Paul's letters, and Paul's credibility, and Paul's invention of Jesus, who never existed. Apart from Paul's letters, there would be no Jesus. And so in all of this, I started with small, open-minded, and gradually came to the point where the guy just disgusts me. And the place where it just became impossible to go forward, we'll come to in our review of this. In fact, I've actually shared it early on, just as an introduction to all of this material. But Paul opines that the covenant that is prescribed in the Torah is of the flesh, because he says that it was formed through Hagar, a slave woman, and therefore with Ishmael. And therefore it is of the flesh and it enslaves. Well, the fact of the matter is that Ishmael and Hagar, his mother, were expressly excluded from the covenant. So rather than the covenant of the Torah being with Ishmael, you'd have to be an idiot to make that claim, because God says, when Abraham says, hey, I have a great kid, Ishmael, can he be the one who inherits the covenant promises? And God said, hell no. Oh, I didn't say hell no. He said absolutely not, unequivocally no. And we find out that that is because Yishak, the son Abraham had through Sarah, Sarah's his wife, would be the one who inherits the covenant's promises. So it is exactly the opposite of what Paul wrote. And so if you're inverting the truth to make your point, you are lying. And there was no way to resolve that. I mean, I must have read 50, 100 Christian protestations trying to make sense of this lie, and all they did was dig themselves in deeper. There is no way. The Christian New Testament is so unworthy, so easy to prove wrong, so disgusting, so filled with fallacies and contradictions and historical inaccuracy and errant quotations of God's testimony. And the Gospels were written so late, and they are written about a myth. It's just preposterous, and it completely corrupts everything that God had to say, particularly about his beloved son. So as I shared, I started open-minded, trying to find the differences between Pauline doctrine and the Torah. And my first attempt was try to resolve them, and I began doing what others have done before me. In fact, some have made it a religion of doing so. I'm looking at the posts from a Michael Rood, who has gazillions of followers on Facebook, and his whole deal is to blend rabbinic Judaism with the Christian New Testament, and it's absolutely stupid. And people believe it. It's say, okay, Christianity is a lie, Judaism is a lie. Let's put them together and we'll have, a really big lie. It's astonishing what people do. Anyway, by blending rabbinic Judaism with Pauline doctrine, they call themselves messianic. But then I reached the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I could no longer find any common ground. Yeah, Wookie's right. That tastes pretty good. The chasm grew too large. The conflicts were insurmountable. And the more I looked to Yahowah for help, the more I found him at odds with Paul. In fact, Yahowah would call Paul out by name 666 years before he wrote this first letter to the Galatians, and call him the plague of death. So you're not going to find any support from God. Ultimately, I had to take sides. I could either be with God or with Paul. Not a hard choice for me. And while that was an easy choice, neither Yahowah nor Dowd is ever easy on those who corrupt their message. Their approach is now mirrored in this book. God is informed, rational, relentless, uncompromising, and especially judgmental. Too much is at stake for any other approach. Also, I suppose that I'm sympathetic to those who believe, as I once did, that Paul spoke for God. I appreciate how enormously difficult it will be for many who are listening to this to process and accept the evidence which is being laid before you. Probably rejected it out of hand because you can't even imagine that your Christian New Testament can be the will of Satan as opposed to God. But it's true, and it's easy to prove. And while I make no apologies for being judgmental, I nonetheless appreciate the fact that this approach, along with the unpopular nature of this message, because there are 2.5 billion people that believe this rot, it's going to turn many people away who might otherwise have been helped if this review were not so dismissive of Paul's demonic mantra. And yet, ultimately, every one of us will eventually take sides on this argument. I've made my choice. I'm presenting you with the information to make yours. You cannot have God in Paul. You cannot have a New Testament and an Old Testament. You can't have the Torah and the Gospels. You can't have Jesus and Yahowah. You can have the lie or the truth. Your call. Surprisingly, it was not especially hard for me to admit that I was wrong. And I was early on. That's one of the things that Yahowah loves, and those people he chooses to work with. The ability to learn from our mistakes. See, God's not ever looking for perfection. Perfection would be boring, and it would give absolutely no way to grow, to benefit from God's tutelage, or reason to go off and explore the universe with him. We need to make mistakes and learn from them. We need to trip and fall and get back up. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a great many things. And I'm always the first to say, that assessment was inaccurate. And then I will go on and share with you what additional information I have learned that would make a much more accurate conclusion. So it was a relief to me, just as I hope it is for you one day. There is something wonderfully liberating and reassuring when you come to terms with Paul and everything falls into place, where there is no longer a collection of odd-shaped pieces which must be wiggled in and whittled down to fit. But the bottom line with all of this is that you should not trust me any more than you distrust Paul. Yahowah alone is trustworthy, as his son is as well. Do your research, compare their testimony, then decide. Or you can use the fact that I've served all this up to you on a silver platter in the 4 or the 5 volumes of Twistianity, all available free for your perusal at yadayah.com. It's all there, absolute, irrefutable proof that the Christian New Testament is trash. There was no Jesus, and that Yahowah is God, and that David is his beloved son, our Savior. Now, speaking of perverting, the King James Version changed if not to but. They added there and that without justification in the text. They ignored thelo and its meaning entirely, as if the verb was not even in the text. They wrote, turned around and changed was rendered, which is what the word means, was rendered as pervert. And euangelion was replaced with gospel. Then to add insult to injury, the KJV replaced the Cairo upsilon placeholder with a transliteration of a derogatory Greek word, which was not actually written in the text. And they wrote Christ. Besides all of that, they did a pretty good job with, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. Latin Vulgate reads, except that there are some persons who disturb you and who want to overturn the euangelion Christi. To Jerome's credit, overturn is a literal translation of metastrupho, and euangelium is an accurate transliteration of euangelion. Didn't help, but at least they got those words right. To help restrain or retain our footing, the text reads, which does not exist differently, if not conditionally or hypothetically negated, because perhaps some are the ones stirring you up, confusing you, and also wanting and proposing to change and pervert the beneficial messenger and the healing message of the Christo. So by contrast, evidently, feeling at liberty to write whatever they wanted, the New Living Translation completely ignored the presence of euangelion in their rendering. You are being fooled by those who deliberately twist the truth concerning Christ. Yet there was not, yet was that not their indiscretion? Tarasso does not mean you are being fooled. There is no basis whatsoever for those who deliberately, nor is there a reference to the truth concerning. The placeholder is based upon Christus, not Christos, and it represents a useful implement, not a Christ. Now, by stating that the Galatians were being fooled by those who were deliberately twisting the truth concerning Christ, the New Living Translation exonerates Paul while condemning Yahweh's witnesses. Truth had been upended. As you consider the third clause of the second sentence, keep in mind that there were two messengers who came out of heaven, one trustworthy, the other deceitful. Also note the switch from Paulos as one individual to we, and I suspect that that is because he wanted his audience to believe that he was now speaking in conjunction with his God. This is something I am particularly attuned to because I have seen it in Muhammad, who also admitted to being demon-possessed. He not only used we similarly throughout the Quran, he positioned himself as arrogantly and egotistically, as does Paul. At the very least, if you aren't yet ready to acknowledge the satanic influence, Paul is elevating himself to the place where he and his God are now speaking with the same voice. Furthermore, he is inferring that he, as a messenger, is representing heaven, while stating unequivocally that a person will be cursed if they challenge him. But to the contrary, if we, or a messenger out of heaven, might convey a healing messenger or beneficial message to you, which is approximately the same or contrary to, even positioned alongside what we delivered as a beneficial messenger to you, then a curse exists. Me. He's Donald Dumpster. Satan. Oh my. If anybody challenges what I say, even though what I'm saying is filled with rational fallacies, filled with internal contradictions, historically invalid, written like a word salad, exceedingly egotistical, and constantly misquotes God and misrepresents his message, you challenge that and you're cursed.
Well, you just got to believe, brother.
He is as bad as is Donald Trump. They are mirror images of one another. Yeah. Stunning. I mean, I don't want to read that again just because it is literally stunning that somebody would write this and that one person, much less 2.5 billion, would believe him. But to the contrary, if we or a messenger out of heaven, so if a messenger from heaven says something that is similar to Paul, contradictory to Paul, or just set alongside what Paul says, then a curse exists. How is that possible? How is it possible that Paul could say that if a messenger out of heaven delivered a message set aside his or contrary to his, that a curse exists? Unless he says that the curse is on him. And you can't figure it out because you're too stupid. You're so filled with faith that your eyes are occluded from being able to see. Your mind is so full of shit that you can't think. You're constipated mentally. Is that the only excuse that you've got here? Because this is really stupid. But to the contrary, if we or a messenger out of heaven might convey a healing messenger or a beneficial message, euangelizo, to you, which is approximately the same or contrary to, even positioned alongside what we delivered as a beneficial messenger to you, then a curse exists. Galatians 1:8.
It sounds like something out of Truth Social that Trump would post.
I think Trump writes similarly. It is.
Yeah.
Trump might put more capital letters. He might have more punctuation errors, but it'd be similar. This not only screams insecurity, which incidentally manifests itself as paranoia, with everyone else seen as a lesser form of life and as a potential foe. This also is delusional, with an insatiable need to be viewed as essential and right, no matter how useless or wrong. And this time, Paul has gone so far as to say that he and his Lord are going to curse the opposition, even if the competitor comes out of heaven. Okay. From this point forward, we are a mere 2 sentences into Paul's first letter, the first that would be written on behalf of the Christian religion, the impetus of the Christian religion. Christians would invoke a curse on any and all who would question their faith. Any opposition to Pauline doctrine would be deemed as satanic. And yet, it was Satan, speaking through his apostle, who was cursing humankind with these words. Funny thing in this regard. I received a letter when I was writing this some years ago from a Christian who claimed that those within her community saw me as a maniacal deceiver who was demon possessed. She didn't find anything in what I had written to challenge, and she took Paul's approach and slandered me with an ad hominem fallacy. And yet, in reality, Yahweh sent a messenger out of heaven to convey his healing and beneficial message. His name explained his purpose, Dowd, the beloved. His message was in perfect harmony with the Towrah, making it the opposite of what is being conveyed here in Pauline Christianity. Therefore, a dreadful consequence does in fact exist. Satan was also a messenger tossed out of heaven. In fact, all of Yahweh's Malach are heavenly representatives and spiritual messengers, although a man can also be a Malach, carry a message, be an envoy. Most are spiritual implements. However, Dowd, like us, is human with a body and a soul, although he's already lived 2 lives and will live a third. And that is not uncommon with those who serve Yahweh. Gospel Jesus is nothing more than a clever counterfeit, a replacement, a myth, which appears genuine and yet has no value whatsoever. Using Shaul in this way, the adversary has brought a curse upon himself and upon all who are in league with him. Yahweh announced this decision in the Garden of Eden, a decade shy of, well, not just 7 years now, shy of 6,000 years ago, telling us that the serpent would be cursed for having beguiled Towrah by corrupting God's instructions. The curse that the adversary brought upon himself is now found its way into Paulus's preamble. It would be represented again in the Talmud and then in the Quran. By writing this, Paul's intent was to render any competitive message or messenger moot, especially Yahweh's and Dowd's. He wanted his audience to join him in condemning his foes, common religious practice, which would include God, of course, and his Messiah. This is akin to Islam, where Allah warns Muslims to be ever ready to attack, even slander and kill all who would besmirch the Islamic God's reputation, by telling the truth, of course. So while Allah is Satan, the wannabe God prevails by labeling his opponents satanic, and therefore confusing the feeble-minded, as has Paul. This duplicity confuses people because most cannot fathom why Satan would oppose Satan, as he appears to do in both Christianity and Islam. But the moment one considers who Satan is and they contemplate what he wants, the answer becomes obvious. Halal ben Shakar, as he is named in the 14th chapter of Yeshaya Isaiah, does not want to be known as Hasatan, the adversary, but instead as the Lord God. He wants to be worshipped as if he were Elion, all things pursuant to the influence of God. Therefore, it was perfectly rational, even clever, for Satan to oppose his adversarial title in texts which not only present the Lord as a God, but which at the same time undermine the credibility of the real God, his nature, his Torah, his covenant, his people, and his Son. When the verb euangelio is changed to a proper noun and it becomes gospel, as it is in the case with the King James Version, we're left with nothing but a curse. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. In this verse, the author of the King James changed Allah to but, as if Shaul selected D to begin the sentence. They ignored Kai, which means and then mistranslated Eon as though, which is though, as opposed to the preposition if. They transliterated, which means replicated the pronunciation of agelos as angel instead of translating, which means replicating the meaning of the word, as messenger. They added preach when there is no basis for it in the Greek. Then they included the words any other without a textual justification, and they replaced the first euangelio as a verb with the noun gospel. That's about the whole thing, isn't it? I think they pretty much perverted the whole. I've said that not only are the original manuscripts, of which there's 69 from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century manuscripts of the Christian New Testament. They differ, of course, from the current text by 300,000 words and a document of 184,000. But while that is a word salad and complete nonsense, there is really no correlation between English translations and what was written in so long ago. It's a farce. Anyway, the King James then arbitrarily added unto, than, and that, all without textual support. They included a second we, rendered the second euangelio, not as gospel this time, but as we have preached, inadequately representing the word rather than replacing it. They added another unto without textual support, and then they included the pronoun him as if Shaul had written it. Since there is very little association between what Paul said and the King James Version and what they published, it's easy to see how people have been misled by their product. So that it is fresh in your mind, Paul actually wrote, but to the contrary, if we or a messenger out of heaven conveys a healing messenger or beneficial message to you, which is approximately the same or contrary to, even positioned alongside what we have delivered as a beneficial messenger and announced as a healing message to you, then a curse with a dreadful consequence exists. Dreadful and deadful seem similar. I don't know why I tripped over that, but a curse with a dreadful consequence exists. If you're looking for someone with perfect diction, then you're not going to much like listening to God, because he does not value perfect diction. He doesn't value perfect anything. He values being right, being loyal, being supportive, being observant, being responsive, and being reliable. If you have disposed of your King James Version for a New American Standard Bible, the translation, which claims to present a literal rendering of the oldest Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It is not much better. And it is as incongruent as the King James Version, and obviously little more than a revision of its more popular predecessor. It wrote, "But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed." It's not what he wrote. Again, it was inappropriate to transliterate angelos, angel, but the crux of the issue here is that the verb euangelio was rendered as preach to you a gospel. The first time it appears, which was wrong linguistically, and the second time the exact same verb appears, it was simply rendered as preach, as if euangelio was one of many Greek words for speak, but it's not. Recognizing that the vaulted and acclaimed Nestle Allen McReynolds interlinear reads, "But even if we or messenger from heaven might tell good message to you, from what good message we ourselves told to you, curse let there be." The New International Version is equally distant from the Greek. "But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned." The common dissimilarity from the words Paul actually penned, combined with their similarity to one another, affirms that these translations are actually revisions of one another. The Nilt, which we have learned, the New Living Translation, is nothing more than a loose paraphrase, although exceedingly popular today among Twistians, under the slogan, "The truth made clear," reads, "Let God's curse fall on anyone, including us, or even an angel from heaven." How about that for upending the message? Who preaches a different kind of good news than the one we preach to you?
That one's out there.
Well, preaches good news would have been a slightly more accurate translation of the first occurrence of euangelion, demonstrating that the words themselves are irrelevant to their presentation. They translated the second euangelizo differently this time, without any reference to different kind or good news, or even the same, even though the same exact word appeared twice in the text. Further, the sentence order in the New Living Translation was reversed, and God's title was outed without textual support. In so doing, the passage now infers that God is the one cursing a specific individual or a group of individuals, as opposed to the contrarian message existing as a curse. Christian theologians are deliberately being inconsistent because gospel and good news are central to their theology. Christendom is based upon these concepts. It is as critical and as errant as the doctrine of the Trinity in this regard. We find the following in Jerome's blend of old Latin manuscripts. "But if anyone, even we ourselves, or an angelos from heaven, were to evangeliate other than the one we have evangeliatomos to you, then let him be anathema." Okay. Once again, we find evidence that Jerome wasn't to blame for the corruption of euangelizo, but he was to blame for the subsequent treatment of Catholic heretics due to his personalizing of the curse. These translations, of course, all affirm that Paul wanted his rivals to be cursed. And by his definition, his opponents were those whose message was contrary to his own. As we will discover as we make our way through his letter, Shaul's rivals will come to include Yahowah and his prophets, Dowd and his people. And while they all speak with one voice, their message was contrary to Paul's. And that is the bottom line. So we will return to Paul's testimony, continue to rip it to shreds, to annul the entire credibility of everything associated with Christendom, in our next program from the Rainbow Studio. We thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. Good day.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch y'all on our next podcast.